Prynhawn da, good afternoon. Good afternoon, delegates. I could see you've all had a good catch-up over the break, and hopefully the cookies, the sugar has given you a bit of a rush to take you through the rest of the session. So I'm absolutely over the moon to invite to the stage Freig Spinnerwein from Fianza. Countries across Europe are facing enormous challenges with homelessness, the cost of living and the rising cost of housing. In a post-Brexit world, it is vital that we continue to learn from our partners overseas. Freig will share how European nations are planning strategically to end homelessness, so please give Freig a warm welcome.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation, and thank you for pronouncing my name correctly. It's perfect. Whenever I'm in Wales, I always have to think back to 2016, the European Cup, when Wales beat us in the quarterfinals, and it's still a difficult feeling. Anyway, seriously, I was asked to speak a little bit about homelessness and homelessness in a European context. Of course, in 25 minutes, it's extremely difficult to be precise. So I apologize beforehand. It will be a little bit superficial, but hopefully sufficiently thought-provoking. Before I start, maybe 2 words about Fianza, because I guess that most of you don't know Fianza or don't know much about Fianza. We are a European NGO, the only European NGO working on homelessness at the moment. I'm not aware of any other European NGO. And our members are organizations working on the issue of homelessness in all EU member states and beyond. So also the UK and some other countries outside of the European Union, the wider Europe, we could say. We have a diverse membership. Originally, Fianza was created as a trade union of the shelter sector. But over time, we have evolved into some kind of a knowledge platform, a movement, which includes all the stakeholders that you need to actually be able to solve homelessness. And inside, we try to bring together the progressive forces and then infect, in a way, the others to follow suit. Our focus is on knowledge and learning, but we also are involved in activism, even in strategic litigation. So at the moment, we have, I think, cases pending with the Council of Europe. It's some kind of semi-judicial process against France, Spain, Belgium, and Czech Republic. So we also do these kind of things, even if the focus is much on knowledge generation and learning. Maybe for those of you who are interested in to taste a little bit the European cooperation on the issue of homelessness, there's 2 big events every year that we organize. One is called our forum, the Fianza Forum, that's normally in June. And then we have an annual research conference, which is for academics, but open to everybody. And that's in September. 15 September in Leuven. It's my hometown in Belgium, very nice city. And next year, the annual forum in June, date has to still be decided, will be in Spain, in Bilbao. So you're all welcome to join us there. We're funded by the European Commission, largely funded by the European Union, by the Commission, the EU Commission. And we're not allowed anymore to spend any European money that we get from the European Commission outside of the European Union area. So not in the UK anymore, and therefore also not in Wales. So that complicates our relations a little bit, but we still work with our UK members in other ways. You know, the only thing we cannot do is spend money on the UK, but there is other ways to cooperate. So we're very proactive and happy to stay in contact. The EU context, and then I will zoom into some country examples. And I'll tell you why it might be interesting for you as well in a minute. We lobbied for 15 years for an EU strategy on homelessness. And in 2021, that strategy was launched, finally. The European Union institutions always resisted homelessness as an issue, and certainly as an issue to build a whole strategy around. That strategy is called the EU Platform on Homelessness. It's not called a strategy because a strategy is a toxic concept now in the European Union, because they had too many strategies that all failed, so they don't use the word strategy anymore. So they have to think of something else. It's called a platform now. What is important is it's a voluntary process. So member states can participate in the platform if they want, but they're not obliged to do so. And still, all 27 member states decided to be part of this platform, including countries like Hungary, Poland, who are known to be Eurosceptic, but also other countries like Denmark or Scandinavia in general, where there is also a sort of a healthy dose of skepticism when it comes to the role of the European Union. All these countries, and these are also countries that are advanced in the area of homelessness, all these countries are part of this platform. And they all signed the Lisbon Declaration. It's called Lisbon Declaration because it's signed in Lisbon, where they say we work together at European level on the issue of homelessness. And we also commit ourselves to make substantial progress towards ending homelessness by 2030. And I think we all know that homelessness will not be solved by 2030 in the European Union, but to make the shift from managing homelessness to ending homelessness, that kind of mental shift, I think is quite important. And to have that as a commitment of all 27 member states is quite unique in the current context. Now that platform has, it's quite new, it's still in development, but it has 3 work streams. One is data collection, especially focused on a local level to increase the availability of quality data at city level. One is mutual learning. This is all that is related to research, identification of best practice, project visits, conferences, etc., etc. And then the third work stream is access to EU funding and financing. So this is the EU grants and the EU loans that can be used. Now, I'm telling you all of that very quickly because it's limited in principle to the European Union member states, but other countries can probably join on a voluntary basis. And I have already encouraged some of your colleagues here to say, well, you should try as Wales, as the Welsh government, to just send a message to the European Commission and say we're interested to join. Let's see what happens. I think they will not find strong arguments not to allow Wales in. So this is an encouragement to be part of that dynamic, which I hope will be quite useful and of added value. Some general trends that you might be interested in. It's no surprise, and I think it's the same in, well, definitely in the UK, I think it's probably the same in Wales. If you take the last 10 years, we have seen growing numbers of homelessness. This is like, if it's the case in Wales, it's not unique. It's everywhere, or almost everywhere. We have made an attempt to estimate the number of people that are on the streets or in the shelter on any given day in the European Union area, which is a delicate exercise because in quite a number of countries there is no data. But it's still important for us to try and have an idea of the scope of the problem. We'll publish it's advanced knowledge because we'll publish the results of that research in September, the beginning of September. But we believe that there is at least 900,000 people that are on any given day on the street or in the shelter system in the European Union area, so excluding the UK. So it's even more if we put the UK inside. That's, apart from the number, the total, maybe more important is to say that that's a 200% increase if you compare to the last time we did that estimate, which was 15 years ago. That's a massive increase. If you compare that with the general anti-poverty trends, which have remained more or less stable over that same period, there is something happening at the bottom end of society which is really concerning. All across Europe, except in Finland, and I understand that Finland will speak after me, so you will be able to dig a little bit more into that, and I'll also say a few words about Finland. But in the last couple of years, talking the last 2-3 years, we have seen other countries where the number has reached a peak, or it's slowly slowly descending again, going down again. And that's promising, and I think it's related to the quality of the policy that is in place. Countries like Denmark have seen a little bump downwards. The Netherlands has seen a little decrease, but also countries like Portugal have seen a decrease or stabilization. So I think if you would ask me 4 or 5 years ago, we would be in quite a dark period with rapidly growing numbers. There is now more and more countries where we seem to have reached a peak. What is quite new in the last years is the massive impact of migration on homelessness, especially the flaws in migration policy. I'm not going into detail because you have all kinds of migrants that find themselves homeless, but what is really new in the European Union is that asylum seekers who have a right, an enforceable right to accommodation, it's organized by EU law and national law at the same time, find themselves on the street. In my city, for instance, where I work in Brussels, they estimate a few thousand asylum seekers to be squatting or on the street. it's a violation of EU law and nobody seems to care, which is really bizarre, I think. But you could say in general, if you take all migrant groups together, that in Western Europe, in Eastern Europe is still slightly different, but in Western Europe, from north to south, probably about 50% and more of the homeless population is of migrant origin. When I started working for Fianza 20 years ago, that was absolutely not the case. It was more an issue for the south of Europe than for the whole west of Europe. A few general dynamics. What we've seen over the last couple of years is a boom in national strategies. The last time I saw this kind of hike in national strategies was at least 10 or 15 years ago. Now we can say that at least half of the EU member states have launched a strategy very recently or are about to launch a strategy soon. Even in countries, big countries like Germany, who have always been quite reluctant to speak about homelessness as a problem in their country, now are working on a national strategy. I think it's an indication that there is growing awareness that homelessness is a distinct problem in need of a distinct solution. Like you cannot count on your welfare system or your general anti-poverty policies to reduce the number of homeless people or even to solve homelessness. You need something separate. And I think that awareness is also growing in countries which are known for their robust welfare states like systems like Germany. A rapidly growing interest in housing first, probably here as well. Also in some countries moving from experimentation to scaling because it's amazing. I don't know why actually every country, sometimes every part of a country, or sometimes every city has to do its own experiment, then find out it works, and then bring it to scale. I think we know now that it works, so I think we can more rapidly move to scale, and I think that's happening to some extent. And I think we also see in the beginning when Housing First sort of mushroomed here and there, it was often an add-on to the system. So you had everything in place and then you added Housing First. I think there is now more and more countries that sort of do the systemic Housing First. Because if you do it properly, it changes the whole way you address homelessness. And there is more appetite for that kind of change, I think. At the same time, and that might be a surprise to you, the shelter system is growing quickly still. The numbers of beds in shelter are growing. And I think many countries are working in a situation where the policies improve, the focus on Housing First is there, is real, but at the same time, they don't manage to reduce the number of homeless people. A country like France is typical for that. Rapidly growing homelessness, rapidly growing numbers of beds in shelter, and at the same time, you try to make the switch to Housing First. It's difficult. The question is, how long will that be sustainable? And another thing that you often see, even if there is positive trends, is criminalization and penalization of street homelessness, especially at local level. I don't think it is because of evil policymakers. It's probably more of, because people don't know what to do about it, lack of knowledge, lack of information on how to do it. But that kind of criminalization, penalization, which was basically pretty much a non-issue in Europe when I started in Fianza, is a bigger issue now, in spite of the positive dynamics. And then there is the element of prevention. There is more awareness that prevention is important, but the kind of targeted prevention is still underdeveloped in most countries. Also because we know surprisingly little about prevention, in the details, I mean. In general terms, yes, but what kind of causes and triggers exactly the combination of what leads to homelessness, we know surprisingly little about that, maybe with the exception of Wales. Now quickly on Housing First, I said that some countries do systemic Housing First. The two countries that I want to mention here are Denmark and Finland. We look at Finland a lot. I think there is also stuff that happens in other countries, so sometimes we might also look beyond Finland, and Denmark would be a good start. What is interesting about both those countries is that they organize Housing First for people with complex needs. But what they found out, especially in Denmark, is that using the chronicity, the time people are homeless as a proxy of the complexity, is not a good thing to do. We imported that idea from the US, where long-term homelessness is complex homelessness, and short-term homelessness is not complex. They found out that that's not the case, that in countries like Denmark, even people that are only once homeless or sort of returning into the system, they all have complex needs. Conclusion, you can do housing first for basically everybody. And I think it's important in all countries to study that relation more. Is chronicity and complexity related or not? And if it's not related, you have to focus on complexity and scale housing first for people with complex needs. That's a message that I have learned from these countries. What we also learned from these countries is that the transition from the shelter-based system to a housing first system is expensive for a while. You need a budget, an important budget for that. That's undeniable the case. And there's also no success without targeted prevention. If you cannot close a tap, you will not be able to get sustained political support over the time for a housing first, housing led policy. In Finland, and maybe Juha can confirm after me, the director of Y Foundation at the time told me that when we started doing housing first about 20 years ago, and we take the number of homeless people at that time, if I look now, we have had to provide 4 flats per homeless person that time. So, and this was with more and more emphasis on prevention. So you don't have any illusions about like how much effort it will take. So taking 4 flats for every homeless person is probably a good estimate of the effort that needs to go into it. And we shouldn't forget that housing first is a policy in development, especially when it comes to social support. It's not finished, the policy. It's in development. It's still experimentation happening. And in the social support area, we need more. We need to have some more work done. Very quickly, sometimes I think it's an inevitable process that you have to go through, and I think Wales is in a good position, where first you focus on shelter, quantity, quality. You try to adapt the shelter system to the profile of the homeless person, men, women, men with dog, men with mental health problems, couples, etc., etc., etc. You also try to adapt to the integration process, because if you move in your treatment of all your other non-housing problems, you have to move to another place, also temporary place, but you have short-term and slightly less short-term and long-term and very long-term shelter, etc. That together with the professionalization of the staff, the investment in the physical infrastructure of the shelter, etc. And what you get, almost inevitably, is a very expensive shelter system with little outflow that becomes a budgetary problem at some point. In a country like France, the government pays 3 billion euro every year only on shelter. It gets on the radar of the Minister of Finance at some point. And when you are in that system, to make the switch to housing first, housing led is easier politically because it's not more expensive. And we see that in countries where a shelter bed occupied during the whole year, it costs on average, or at least 15,000 euro per year, you can make the switch. You can make the cost-benefit argument. That's what we see in a number of countries. Now, I will quickly pass on Finland because somebody will speak on Finland. But it's quite interesting to see how in Finland, over the last 15 years, 20 years, they have consistently been able to reduce homelessness. Even if there's little bumps, even if there's little bumps here and there, it has consistently gone down. And actually the dark part of the bar is the people staying with family and friends, which is the biggest part of the homeless population. So you could say that they almost have solved homelessness as we know it. But before my colleague from Finland speaks, I think it's useful to say, what do we know objectively? What explains objectively the Finnish success? And what are the things that are more invisible, because the invisible bit is probably more important than the visible bit. What is clear is a sustained housing first, housing led strategy over 15 years. It stayed the same. Like, that's important, of course. The housing ministry in the lead. I think it's important. It allows to sustain that kind of housing led, housing first strategy. Buy-in of the shelter sector is really important. Don't do housing first, housing led in parallel to the shelter system. Try to pull the shelter system into delivering housing first. In Finland, they did that by giving money to the shelter system to transform physically the shelters into supported housing, which led to some kind of collective housing first. It was key to the success in Finland. And of course, also clear objectives towards ending homelessness. And they sort of had intermediary objectives, like no problem to cut the objective in bits and pieces. I think what is equally important is invisible bits. What I am always impressed about in Finland is focus on the rule rather than the exception. Maybe it sounds logical to you, but when I speak and I'm in contact with social work professionals, very often people will get quite obsessed with the exception. For instance, in Housing First, people will say, I know somebody for whom Housing First will not work. Yes, we know that, I agree, but that's no point, that's no reason not to do Housing First if it works for most. And that kind of obsession with the exception is makes policy quite complicated. If you want to anticipate every single exception that might occur, it makes your policy so complex that they don't work. So it's better to focus on the rule. Simplification of the problem rather than complexifying the problem. In Finland, I have the impression sometimes many countries, people want to say homelessness is complex as an issue of professional pride, you know. I work on homelessness, you think it is probably something marginal, but actually it's very complex. In Finland, they seem not to need that. They simplify problems rather than complexify. Quick example, somebody asked a Finnish expert, how do you get over this NIMBY problem if you house homeless people? Because most people are scattered in the normal stock. But he says, we don't tell the neighbors that the person is homeless. That's an example. Pragmatism, consensus, not only political consensus, but consensus also amongst all stakeholders. The current Finnish government has made a radical shift to the right, coalition with the extreme right at the moment, and the objective to end homelessness by 2027 stays. I don't know if there's many countries that can say that that would be the case with them. And the last thing maybe is that for them a setback is not an indication of the failure of the policy. You saw the little bumps, you know, when it increases a little bit. It was not a reason for the sector to say, you see, I told you, it fails. We have to do something else. No, they said, it's a problem, we have to look at the problem, deal with the problem, but continue with the strategy. And I think that's quite important. Some very quick ideas from other countries without going into detail. In relation to transition from shelter to housing, Denmark has something really interesting, where the government, national government, pays half of the cost of shelter for local authorities. Local authorities pay the other half. I don't know what the situation is in Wales. Now the government has decided in a new piece of legislation that that money continues to go to the local authorities, but only if they use it for support in housing after 3 months. So local authorities can keep the 50% for 3 months in shelter, and then the person has to obligatorily move to housing, and then they can continue using that support, receiving that financial support, but only for paying for social and health support. It is transforming the way homelessness is addressed in Denmark. On access to housing, I heard earlier on in the discussion, don't look at the private rental sector or the private housing sector. Well, I don't know. In my country, in Belgium, there is a policy to socialize private rent, especially in a country where you have a lot of small landlords with 1 or 2 flats. Many of these people are willing to make their flats available at below market price, and for very vulnerable people on the condition they get the rent every month and that somebody takes care of the tenant. And that's what we do in Belgium with intermediate structures that are funded by the state. Now we have been able to socialize between 10,000 and 20,000 flats for very vulnerable people, mostly homeless people. That's not nothing. And the thing is that if you do that, it's quite expensive, I have to say that, but it's quick. It's much quicker than building social housing. In Scotland, the prioritization of homeless people in access to social housing, quite impressive. I've been told by a former president of FEANZA that in Edinburgh, for instance, 70% of all public housing lets go to homeless people. In my country, it is less than 5%. And they think it's absolute maximum that can be done. Well, if you look at Scotland, that is margin, I think. Right to housing in France, there is an actual enforceable right to housing and right to shelter for certain categories of homeless people. I'm not going into detail, but having litigation as an instrument that you can use to keep the government on track, it is useful. I think there is too little litigation in most countries when it comes to access to housing for homeless people. Local connections. Everybody asks a question like, but if you have good policies, how do you avoid that people come to your city, for instance, because you have better policies than others? You need some kind of local connection. In the Netherlands, they have a clever way to organizing that. They call it warm transfer. So a city can say, you cannot get help in my city. I'll send you back to your own city where you have a local connection, but I will make sure that you're connected to the right services. And as long as that's not the case, the person cannot be sent back. It's simple, but it works quite well. I'll skip that because we're out of time, probably. But there is many other things, like Italy, the south of Europe, we mentioned too little. But in relation to Housing First, one of the big problems we often hear is loneliness. People are disconnected from the local society. Well, in Italy, they have, from the beginning, put a lot of attention to the connection with the local community for people being housed through Housing First. And it works very well. It's probably more part of their culture, etc., but it doesn't mean it cannot serve as an inspiration. But I still wanted to say that also Wales is being looked at by the rest of Europe, especially your prevention legislation. And so you better deliver on it because people think it's a thing to do, to follow. So it's not only going to look for examples in other countries to replicate in your own country or to use as an inspiration. Wales also give inspiration. Also, don't forget that there is a lot of bad practices out there, and we have to be sure that we don't organize European cooperation to exchange bad practices, because some people are quite interested in bad practices because they are sometimes easy, but I'm not going into detail there. I have to stop. Some interesting research findings, but that will be for the next time or during the coffee break later on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Freek, and I think everybody will agree that was truly inspiring, and we could probably listen to you for another 2 hours, but unfortunately we've got a number of speakers who are now joining us online. I don't think we have, I'm looking at Ruth, I don't think we have time, unfortunately, for questions at this point, so we'll go to our next speaker. But thank you very much. Please join me again in thanking Freek. So, as Freek referred to, we will now go seamlessly to Juha Kahila, Head of International Affairs for the Y Foundation. Finland has long been the model for putting Housing First into practice and remains the only European country, as you referred to, where homelessness is falling. There's been much learning, and Finland has now launched Housing First 2.0, a new implementation plan, and Juha online will share how Finland is revising and refreshing the Housing First model. So please give a warm welcome to our online speaker.
Thank you very much, and I think all I need to say is hello and thank you, because Freek almost told everything I'm about to tell you now, but yeah. Of course, just kidding. Good to be here remotely, even though I was supposed to be there in Wales with you, but things happened and I need to be here in Helsinki, but good to have this thing remotely going on. But I can see that we are a little bit behind the schedule, so without further talks, I will start sharing my screen if I'm still able to do it in Zoom. Let's see, I haven't done this in months. So Housing First 2.0. I wouldn't say it's that much of a radical change of the Housing First model we are doing in Finland, but rather an evolution of the work that we plan to do in the future here in Finland. But let's see. Of course, like Freek told you, we have a new government and they released their government plan last Friday, and there is the target to end homelessness by 27, but of course there are some other obstacles on our way with that program as well. But of course we need to work together and with all the key stakeholders, and if we need to, we will find a detour to pass those obstacles. But we will have to see after summer what will the reality be regarding that program. But there is the goal, but there are some other things that are obstacles in a way. But few words about the Y Foundation. So Finland's largest national non-profit landlord, where I work, and then specialist in homelessness work. And I think the main thing here at the Y Foundation is that we have the development unit where I work, and then we have a research team of our own, 4 researchers and 1 research assistant. And then we do all kind of research regarding homelessness and affordable housing and housing and all those kind of things, and housing first and so on. Not only in Finland, but also internationally with our partners. So that's one of the things that makes us quite unique. And then we also run different kind of projects around homelessness. So for example, a few years ago, we had a project around women homelessness, and now we are running with youth homelessness and those kind of things. So that's quite unusual for a landlord, but that's one of the key things we are doing. And of course, we have nearly 20,000 apartments around Finland as well. So that's of course the main thing we are doing and housing for homeless people and those who are on the edge of becoming homeless. We have around 7,500 apartments and then 11,000 affordable social homes. And then we build ourselves the apartments, and then we also buy individual apartments from the private market. But this is more of the same. And yeah, like you heard from Freek, that Finland is the only EU country where the number of homeless people is on the decline for many years on a roll. And then of course now we get the latest numbers from Denmark, and then their numbers are also going down. And I think there is some really great innovations in their new homelessness strategy, like Freek told you, and I think it's worth of the spotlight that they are having at the moment. And I was there in this February and learned a lot. And I think there are many things that we could also take in their new strategy to Finland and make some progress here as well. But of course, many countries are doing great work, but I agree completely with Freek that we don't need pilot projects anymore and experiments, but we need to scale on and then start going all in a way to housing first. And these are the statistics. You already saw this, but I think it's important also to have the time perspective, that it wasn't a magic trick that happened overnight, but it's a result of a long and consistent work. And of course, here that we start the housing first 2008. So after that the numbers have been steadily going down every year almost. And now the result is that we have 3,886 homeless people in Finland regarding the statistics, and of course the goal is to have zero homelessness by 27. And then long-term homeless people who have been homeless over a year or multiple times during a 2 years period, a little bit over 1,000, and then short-term homeless people a little bit over 2,500. But as Freek already told, that in Denmark they have made some studies and realized that the short-term homeless people, they also have usually have some kind of mental health problems or challenges or substance abuse challenges. So even though we are talking about sofa surfers and people sleeping with their friends and relatives, I think it's important to understand that these people also need support, and the situation is not easy. And then this will take forever, so let's speed it up. But that is the ultimate goal in Finland. And what that means in reality is that, there will be, I think, some homeless people in 2027. I think in the Juha Kaakinen's report Home, which basically put the framework onto our work for the coming years, says that there could be 300 people homeless at any given time, but we should house those 300 people within a month. So their homelessness would be really, really short term, and the housing-led solutions and housing first would work quite well. And of course, the prevention work is one of the key things here as well, to make sure that that people don't end up being homeless altogether. And of course, we've had the strong political background since we started the Housing First 2008, and then it was basically all in, and the goal was to end long-term homelessness. And then of course we are still hunting that goal, but I think we are on the right path still. And then one of the main things, of course, was that we we renovate almost all the shelters into these housing first units, single site units, which I show you a couple of pictures later on. And then with that, we could get quite many apartments in a short period of time and make the impact visible for everyday people as well. So we were able to house almost all the people from the streets and shelters, etc. So that was really important part of the work. And then the third program was all about prevention work. And then the latest program, which ended, was about the cooperation between cities, and cities had a lot of responsibility regarding the homelessness work. And then some cities did quite well. For example, city of Helsinki was able to reduce the number of homeless people by 47%. And nowadays in Helsinki, there is under 900 homeless people. And then they have been doing great work regarding that. But of course, there are also some big cities that didn't manage quite well, and the number of homeless people is growing. So it has been quite uneven progress in that sense. So how Housing First in Finland got started altogether, the first iteration in a way. So it was about these four wise men back in the days who came up with this report, Name on the Door, and it was the first steps of the Finnish Housing First model. Because back then, the people who came up with the Finnish Housing First, they didn't know about the Pathways model from New York, the Sam Chambers model. And I think in a way we are quite lucky that they didn't know about it, because the Finnish model draws on the Finnish social model and social security system and take all the best elements from there. And that's how our model works in our country rather well. And I think that if we would have been copying the Pathways model from New York, I think we wouldn't be here where we are at the moment. And then, of course, there are a lot of similarities, but also some things that are quite different. So this is Housing First in Finland. And I think there is two main principles that we follow. So the permanent housing in different housing solutions, and then the tailor-made support as long as needed. And I think the key word here for me is the normality. So people who have experienced homelessness, they get their rental agreement for a permanent rental agreement. They get the same rights and responsibilities that comes with the rental agreement. They tend to use the same social and health services as anyone else. They are entitled to the same social benefits and so on. So there is this aspect of normality in the work that we are doing. And this is the part Freek was already talking about. So we have different housing options for homeless people. So most of the former homeless people, they live in scattered housing, and there is the flowing support and home visits and everything between. And about 80% of the former homeless people, they live in scattered housing with the support. But then we have also these Housing First, supported Housing First units. And then we have this new hybrid model, which is attached to the Housing First 2.0. But I will now share you a few pictures about this. So this is a Väinölä. This used to be a shelter in the city of Espoo near Helsinki. And there was around 50 bed places, big rooms, beds, nothing more, nothing less. And then when we started the Housing First in Finland, we did the renovation, and now the building looks like this. So there is 33 individual apartments. People are living there. They have permanent rental agreements. And then Y Foundation did the whole renovation of the building, and we leased the whole building to the city of Espoo, and they are buying the services from the Salvation Army. And then these solutions have worked really, really well. And then, of course, it takes a lot of work to make them work as well. So it's not a magic trick in that sense. But there is 24/7 support available downstairs if and when needed, and there is different kind of activities in the building. For instance, the people, they do all the cleaning and all the maintenance work by themselves. They get paid when they do it, of course. And then there is also different kind of work activities. They make T-shirts and there is also some kind of they fix bikes, and they fix computers and all those kind of things. And when people take part in these activities, they get paid when they do it, obviously. So I think in that sense, these solutions have worked really well. And sometimes we get critique that, you shouldn't house homeless people next to each other. And we like to think that why is it okay that, young people, they can live in the same building, elderly people can live in the same building. So is it really the worst nightmare for a homeless people to have a neighbor who is also former homeless people? We don't think so, and the tenant seems to be agreeing with that vision. And normal studio apartments with the bathroom and kitchen, and people can decorate the apartments like how they want, because of course it needs to feel like a home. So now to the Housing First 2.0. So if the Housing First 1.0 was launched with a report by 4 wise men back in the days, the second version, or the evolution of the work 2.0, was launched with a proposal from around 30 smart women and men and others. And then I think we have all the key stakeholders doing this work. So we have the ministries, cities, local authorities, NGOs, experts by experience, housing providers, health services, criminal sanctions agency, and so on. So I think we had a quite good combination of the different stakeholders, and with that, I think we made some good paper regarding the evolution of the work. And then how we did this work is that we had this Housing First 2.0 change laboratory, and there was 2 professors from the universities of Helsinki and Tampere who facilitate the work and these workshops. And then they had interviewed many people from the field, homeless people, former homeless people, service providers, city people, ministries, and so on. And then in this workshop, we look at those interviews and then hear about, from their experience, what are the biggest obstacles, challenges, but also the good stories around the work at the moment. And we started on working on that sense, and then regarding what they told us. And then we met 6 times. I think the session lasting 2 hours. I think it was more of a 4 hours per session, because you know that every time we get to talk about these things, it usually 20 minutes is not enough and 1 hour is not enough. And I think here it was more or less 3 and 4 hours per session. And of course, between the sessions, we have small groups where we analyze the proposals and solutions and work them forward into the next meetings, and then we work them together with a bigger group. And the last 2 sessions, we outlined the vision. What should the homelessness work in Finland look like in the future for the coming years? And we came out with these 6 spearheads or proposals where we should put our focus on. And like I said in the beginning, Housing First 2.0, it's not like a revolution. It's more like an evolution of the work we are doing, but we want to emphasize that it's the Finnish Housing First 2.0. So that's why the 2.0 is in the name. So number 1, of course, we still need more apartments, especially small affordable studio apartments in the Helsinki metropolitan area. And then housing and services for the clients with most complex needs. I think we have some good solutions already for that, but I think we need to do more research and find more solutions as well. Because especially now after COVID, we have seen that more people need more support, and of course loneliness has been one of the things that have triggered other issues as well. And then the work and meaningful everyday activities, like I mentioned in the Housing First units, they are doing low threshold work activities. But I think there is a need for improvement regarding that. In Finland, we haven't really tried on social enterprises regarding this kind of work, and volunteers hasn't been involved that much. So I think there's a lot of things we can learn from other countries, from Wales example, and I try to bring those good practices into our own work. And then the early identification and prevention of homelessness. So of course we have the housing advice services, which we have been developing in the past years, but also the early identification. So whenever a person goes into health, social services, school services, or school health services, that there is this kind of basic question that is regarding how is your housing situation. so that we could get the information as early as possible and the people could get the support they need as early as possible and as light support as possible, because usually the sooner we find out the challenges, the easier it's help. It also is to help people and to prevent that the situation doesn't end up, in a worst case scenario, being homeless altogether. So these kind of things we have been working on with the 2.0. And this number 5 and 6 are the biggest things, of course. The integration of substance abuse, mental health care, and housing services based on the housing first principle. That is a big task for sure, and especially now when the social and health services move beginning of this year, they sorry move from the cities into these well-being counties. So there is a new system also in the social and healthcare, and then I think at the moment all our energy is going to make sure that the homelessness issues doesn't fall in a gap between the cities and these well-being areas. Because at one point when we were asking from the well-being counties that, and hey, who is your person responsible on homelessness? What? Homelessness? It's nothing to do with us because we don't have the homes. And then when we ask from the city that, hey, who is the person in charge of the homelessness things? Hey, we have the homes, but we don't have the services, so those things doesn't belong to us. So there was this real fear that homelessness would end up in this gap, that no one is responsible. But I think we have made some really good progress regarding that and making sure that there is working protocol at the moment, both in well-being counties, but also in cities regarding homelessness. And they are now starting to put on their own networks in that sense. And then, of course, putting the house and social work in structures of municipalities, and that's a long road, long shot, so-called moonshot, I think. But I think we have made some progress, and of course now the main thing has been, we have had homelessness and housing first course in the University of Applied Sciences, but now we are also trying to have homelessness and housing courses on lower level education as well. So let's see. Those are some first steps we are taking at the moment, but I think really important steps nevertheless. But now I will show you a couple of examples regarding the 2.0, what we have done, what we are really proud of at the moment, and then if you have some questions. So this is the housing first unit Väylä plus day center and scattered housing. So this is so-called hybrid model, which means that there is a block of buildings, and then there is a small supported housing first unit, 20 apartments in the first building, and the other 2 buildings are normal affordable social housing. They share the same yard, all the people, and so on. And then there is the day center, and I think that has been one of the key things regarding the social integration of the people who are living in the unit, and to not just these other buildings, but the whole neighborhood overall. Because in the day center, the neighbors, they can run different kind of classes. There has been cooking classes, pool clubs, photography classes, computer classes, all these kind of quite basic things. And of course, the people living in the supported housing first unit, they can take part on those courses as well if they want. So it has been a quite good way to have this kind of normal way to integrate into the neighborhood without forcing. And no one is asking that, hey, are you living in those affordable homes, or are you living in the homelessness unit or anything like that? So it has proven to be a really good way to do this work, and also it has been a really good way to the neighborhood. So when we start building this and planning this, we took the neighborhood along and told them what kind of buildings we're going to build here and so on. And at the end of the day, the neighborhood was really eager to also give their own opinions that, hey, the day center should have this kind of decoration and these kind of things and so on. So I think that was also quite crucial that to avoid the NIMBY reaction and all the other challenges. And of course, it's not perfect. There are still challenges from time to time, but mostly from the affordable social housing side, not so much from the unit. But I think this is the future regarding when we need to build more of these housing first units, that they should be like a block of buildings and a small unit, and then something else around it. Just looking to watch. And then housing counseling, all the housing advice services, of course, that's huge thing regarding the prevention work and and it's very scalable, effective, and now it's on a statutory model. So everyone in regarding what is your housing model, even you own your apartment or you're living in affordable social housing rental apartments or private market rental apartments, you should have phone number where you can call these housing advice services when and if you have some kind of problems to pay your rent, for example, or problems with the neighbors, and they can guide you through your challenges. And then only last year these services were able to prevent many thousand evictions in Finland. So it's a crucial part of the work and goes hand in hand with housing first. And then I think what Freek said is one of the most important thing is that, you know, when you have affordable housing stock, you need to target those homes for the people in need. And then Freek, you are totally right that in Finland, you need 4 homes to house one homeless person, basically. So if we say that we have around 4,000 homeless people, we would need around 16,000 new affordable social homes in the coming years. So we could house all of them. But of course, the mathematics, it's not that logical, and let's see what happens regarding that. But the main thing is that we need to keep on targeting those apartments for the people in need and who are homeless or on the edge of becoming homeless, and make sure that keeps the same way. And then we have the Nopsa-Jalka low threshold multi-professional team, which is a completely new way of doing the services for us here in Finland. And then we have been developing these multi-professional teams nationwide for this year, and they are working in the big cities at the moment. And then they can, for example, work cooperation with the housing advice services. They can rapidly give the different kind of support that people may need, you know, regarding mental health issues and substance abuse issues, and they can make sure that people find rapidly the right services for them. And then, of course, also working people sleeping rough. Yes, there are still some people in Finland sleeping rough, and of course, these teams can help them to guide them through to the services and also give support by themselves with the team as well. And I think that has worked really well in some cities. And then working with people in shelters and temporary accommodation. And the main idea is that, you know, you don't have to wait that long to get access into these Nopsa-Jalka teams, but they move rather rapidly and quickly and try to work with you from the day one, and then guide you through the right services and so on. The main thing here is the easy access, low threshold. And then I think I agree completely what Freek said, that, you know, I think we have many national strategies coming regarding homelessness and housing first, and we have the leadership and we have the vision, but we also need the money to start, for example, renovating the shelters into housing first units and start housing more people. We need the money, and I think that the courage comes to a place that more and more politicians should have the courage to spend that money. And then in Finland, we have also made the studies that when you spend that money at some point, not necessarily in the first 5 or 10 years, but at some point you will also start saving money. And then I think that's also important part to remember. But first you need to spend money so that you are able to save money at some point. But we need to have the courage to do the change. And this is classic slide from our former CEO, Juha Kaakinen. So you can't have housing first without actually having the housing first. Thank you. That was all from my part.
Thank you very much indeed, Juha. On behalf of the delegates, I'm sure every single person in this room is rather envious of those falling numbers in homelessness, and the journey that you've taken is certainly more than impressive. So I really appreciate you sharing that with us today. Unfortunately, because we're running slightly over time, we're going to have to go to our next speaker, but on behalf of the conference, thank you very much.
Thank you. Take care.
So we will now go to our next speaker. Elizabeth Hammer is the Managing Director of Neuner House, an organisation providing support for people experiencing homelessness in Vienna, and Chair of the BAWO, the umbrella organisation for the homelessness sector in Austria. Elizabeth is also the author of Look Instead of Looking Away, How a Society Without Homelessness is Possible. We're delighted to have Elizabeth joining us virtually from Vienna, where she will be outlining how a vision and broad commitment to ending homelessness can be created. Thank you. Please give a warm welcome to Elizabeth online.
Thank you all. Can you hear me? I guess so. I hope so. Okay, so I go along. Thank you very much for the invitation to speak at this conference today. I hope you have already had fruitful discussions, and I'm sure some of the themes which have already been raised will also be reflected in my speech. Over the next 20 minutes, I want to talk about why I think a radical focus on systemic impact is needed to end homelessness. I will start with a critical look at what I see, at least in Austria, as the current focus and role of social organizations. However, I promise my aim is to finish on a positive note. So in the second part of my speech, I will outline why I believe rethinking how we work could maximize our impact, and also to give a practical example of this based on a current project in Austria. As mentioned, I'm the managing director of the social organization Neuner House in Vienna. By taking a critical look at social organizations, I'm therefore also taking a critical look at my own work. At Neuner House, we offer services for people experiencing homelessness in the areas of housing, health, and social participation. Among other things, we have been implementing Housing First since 2012. We have developed a training curriculum for peers employed in homelessness services in Vienna, and we also have years of expertise in providing social work and healthcare for people who are homeless and uninsured. On the one hand, I'm quite proud of all these services and projects and the impact they have on people experiencing homelessness. But on the other hand, there is a strategic question that keeps me busy. Does our work really have a systemic and policy impact on having homelessness, or are we just finding better ways to manage homelessness? As we all know, social organizations in the field of homelessness are heavily influenced by the environments we are working in. We have to respond to new societal developments and crises, often without the necessary preparation, time, and resources, but we still do it. The structural conditions around us are also very challenging. The dynamics of the housing and the labor markets and the limitations of social welfare systems all have an impact on the homelessness sector. At the same time, as social organizations, we often have limited opportunities and resources to directly influence these wider external systems. Added to this feeling of a lack of power is the pressure that comes from knowing that without our work, the people we support would be in even more precarious conditions. In my view, this is quite a specific set of challenges we are having to deal with. When the direct support of individuals is always the top priority, there can be little opportunity to work on systemic issues, even when we know they would contribute to ending homelessness long term. So just to make it clear, I know that the conditions we are working in are extremely challenging and that they have a restrictive impact on our work. But in my view, we have to acknowledge that we as social organizations, at least when I look at the situation in Austria, also play a significant role in limiting ourselves. We turn our focus inwards as a way to combat these external restrictions and as a way to find room to act and to have impact. What do I mean by this? Let's take housing services in Austria as a practical example. We develop parallel systems and services as a substitute for access to mainstream housing. In doing so, we are only addressing issues in the short term. We are reinforcing boundaries between us as the social sector and other sectors at a time when we need to be breaking these boundaries down more than ever. In these, so to speak, alternative systems, we can exercise a certain amount of autonomy and control, but we are ultimately not contributing to ending homelessness long term. In fact, by maintaining these systems, you could say we are making this goal even more difficult to achieve. With all this in mind, and being a managing director of a social organization myself, I feel obliged to call for a change in how we think about our role. My argument here is not that we stop offering direct support services, rather that alongside this, we recognize the contribution we could make to changing the wider structural factors needed to end homelessness and make this a more deliberate focus of our work. To achieve this, we need to consciously use our resources, be they financial, intellectual, or human. One example of a resource social organizations could be using more effectively, in my view, is our knowledge base. Through our work supporting people facing multiple exclusion, we have insights into the failings and challenges of many different systems. We know how these systems interact and see the opportunities for more joined up thinking. This body of knowledge is critical for shaping policy demands and developing effective strategies to end homelessness and other forms of social exclusion. But as I see it, with my insights into the situation in Austria, most of the time we keep this knowledge to ourselves and don't use it systematically. I think there are two ways social organizations need to reorientate our work to increase our systemic and political impact. The first is to focus on policy work. This can be within our own organizations, but also in cooperation with other organizations, and especially with umbrella bodies at a national level or European level. In addition to policy work, the second key to achieve wider structural impact is by implementing specific projects that focus on systematic change. Projects that show on a smaller scale how our demands at the structural level can work in practice. Projects that also show how cooperation across different sectors can work and how the expertise and creativity of all stakeholders can be used effectively to bring about change. At BABO, the umbrella organization in Austria that I'm chairwoman of, we have been running a project like this over the past 2 years. In the second part of my speech, I will introduce you to the key components of this project before moving on to some ideas and conclusions around systemic impact that I hope might be relevant for your context here in Wales. Now, you might argue that one innovative project alone can by no means change the whole system. I agree with you. I believe we need a national strategy on ending homelessness in Austria, similar to the action plan in Wales. But looking realistically at our political situation, this might not be a goal we can easily achieve in the short term. But what we can do in the short term is implement projects that show the solutions we are calling for in action. This makes it easier for policymakers and other stakeholders to adopt these solutions as they have already been proven to be successful. The project we are implementing in Austria is called Arriving Home, in German Zuhause ankommen. And it is a Housing First project at a national level involving all 9 Austrian states. It was initially a 2-year project funded by the Austrian Ministry of Social Affairs as part of the ministry's response to the COVID-19 pandemic, and we are currently waiting on a decision about further funding. The project is being coordinated and managed by BABO, and this is a new approach to us. Before this, our work had mainly been focused on policy. However, we saw an opportunity to design a project with high impact and to position not only one social organization, but the social sector as a whole as an effective cooperation partner in a national strategic project. So BABO decided to take the lead. Simply put, the project provides people at risk of poverty and exclusion with affordable housing in line with Housing First principles. Arriving Home brings together the Austrian social service sector and the limited profit housing sector. The social sector is represented by BAWO. The housing sector is represented by GBV, the Austrian Federation of Limited Profit Housing Associations. Limited profit housing organizations provide affordable and permanent homes, and member organizations on both sides collaborate on allocating flats and providing social care. Over the past 2 years, we secured housing for 1,147 people in 556 apartments. Before accessing housing through the project, 42% of people were housed in institutional settings, 28% were insecurely housed, and 30% were living independently. With Arriving Home, we are therefore contributing to deinstitutionalizing homelessness support and tackling hidden homelessness, 2 key challenges we face as a sector. Looking at data on gender from the project shows that we are making progress here as well. In traditional homelessness services, we tend to see a gender ratio of around 2/3 men to 1/3 women. In Arriving Home, this ratio is reversed and women make up 2/3 of the people supported by the project. Working together with housing associations also gives us a greater geographical reach. It allows us, for example, to offer support directly in rural areas, which are often poorly served by homelessness services. This means people can find housing where they already have a local connection and social networks, rather than where homelessness services happen to be available. For me, there are a few key elements of Arriving Home that make it successful and mean it has a wider systemic impact. My hope is that the learnings from this project will be used to implement similar projects in the future in Austria, or better still, to set clear-cut goals for a comprehensive national strategy to end homelessness. I also hope that while I reflect on these points, there might be something relevant for the work you all are doing here in Wales. The first key element is having the Ministry of Social Affairs as an active stakeholder in the project. This political commitment has already increased the engagement with the goal of ending homelessness at the national policy level. Having the ministry recognize the value and expertise BAWO and its members can add also makes it more appealing for other stakeholders to work with us. Additionally, federal funding from the ministry gives us greater freedom in how we implement the project. We adapted the eligibility criteria and redefined who can receive support. For example, we can now focus on people who do not meet the eligibility requirements for support from services in individual Austrian states, and also on women living in insecure housing situations. Knowing what we do about the barriers these groups face in accessing support, we see this as a particular success of our approach. This is something that is currently only possible because of federal funding, but might be part of a reform of eligibility criteria in Austrian states at some point in the future. Crucially, federal funding also allows us to directly cover the upfront cost contributions people need to become tenants in the limited profit housing sector in Austria. This removes a significant barrier to housing by opening up a segment of affordable housing that was not previously in reach for people in poverty. And this is a special value, a special added value of the project. This leads to the second aspect, the cooperation with the limited profit housing sector. While there have been examples of cross-sector cooperation in the past, Arriving Home operates on a much larger scale and also involves the relevant umbrella organizations. More than 70 profit housing associations, along with 20 social organizations, have committed to work to specific Housing First quality standards to provide permanently affordable housing. This is a powerful structure with the potential to scale up and to have an even greater impact on ending homelessness. This collaboration is also a good example of stakeholders from different sectors identifying common goals and working together to achieve them. Limited profit housing associations have an obligation to make affordable housing available to a broad section of the population. However, they don't necessarily have the experience to support the most vulnerable and excluded groups. On the other hand, social organizations have the expertise, but struggle to access affordable housing for the people they support. Through Arriving Home, housing associations benefit from the tools, knowledge, and experience of social organizations to make housing available to excluded groups and thereby fulfilling their social mission. With expertise on topics like matching tenants to flats and rent monitoring, the homelessness sector makes the argument for collaboration on an equal footing and positions itself as a competent negotiating partner. This professionalizes the relationship between the social and housing sectors and brings common goals around social inclusion and affordable housing to the fore. I mentioned earlier that social organizations need to be better at using and sharing the knowledge we have gained through our work to have systemic and political impact. In Arriving Home, sharing knowledge about the barriers to accessing affordable housing and the Housing First approach as a long-term solution to homelessness was a focus from the start. Through events and communications work, we share successes, challenges, and best practices. In all our communications, we make sure to use imagery that positively challenges people's perceptions of homelessness. At BAWO, we think that taking this approach of proactive and open communication is highly relevant for influencing the discourse on homelessness and to stress the need for structural solutions to homelessness as a structural problem. This leads me to my third point about systemic impact of the project. All the activities I've already talked about have made it possible for us to mainstream Housing First in Austria. We have stakeholders across housing, policy, and public administration. As one colleague at state government level put it, we know now that we can no longer avoid Housing First. I think this is a pragmatic but adequate basis for a broader political commitment, and I really do appreciate this statement. My fourth and final point is what we learned about the potential of such projects to challenge the status quo and reframe the idea of what is possible. There is no doubt that we are in challenging times and that the impact of multiple crises on the people we support is and will remain significant. However, challenging times can also be catalysts for change. They force people to think creatively and break down boundaries at both the organizational and systemic level. I believe focusing on systemic and political impact leads to radical approaches that can change organizational cultures and motivate key players across the social, housing, and political sectors to act. In my experience, innovation is particularly powerful when it occurs at the boundaries between different sectors or when it is closely linked when it closely links the delivery of high-quality services with policy work. The work that has been done in ways to reduce the number of evictions from social housing is another example of how sectors working together can create more impact than either sector working alone. We need to make sure we learn from approaches like this and build on their success to make lasting changes to structures and systems. We need to think creatively about how we can best bring together our expertise and resources to have the most impact and constantly challenge our view of ourselves and our respective roles in ending homelessness. I know that the pressures on social organizations can make it difficult for us to look beyond our own organizational sector. The funding we receive from the social sector is often short-term and keeps us thinking within the boundaries of the social sector. We also speak the language of the social sector, which means we only speak to people we already understand, who already understand us. The complexity of cooperating with other sectors means we stick to the stakeholders we already know. As you may have guessed, I do not believe this kind of mindset is helpful when it comes to ending homelessness. We also need to speak to people we don't understand. We need to cooperate with people who think differently to us. We need to focus on long-term solutions, even when social sector funding often focuses on short-term goals. My closing challenge to us all is therefore this: whether a manager in a social sector, a director of a housing association, or working in the public sector, we all need to think outside the box to end homelessness, but we also have to act outside the box to end homelessness. Thank you for your attention.
Elizabeth, thank you on behalf of the conference delegates today for sharing your journey, and the messages received loud and clear. It's about the partnerships and it's about working together to bring an end to homelessness. So thank you very, very much for your presentation today. Very much appreciated.
Thank you.
I'm now going to bring the afternoon entertainment back on stage. So I'm going to hand over to Mark Hodges, who will take us through the final round of Slido voting. Mark, over to you.
Yes, my moment. Hi, everybody. I warned you I would be back, and I apologise. Here I am yet again. I've got far less time than I had this morning, though, so I'm going to ask you to crack on. If you could scan the afternoon poll, which is on the stands on your desk. If you are online, joining us from very far away, you can join in on slido.com 3550540. And I want to know, in 2 or 3 words, what have been your main takeaways from today? And if anyone says heat stroke, I'm coming for you. Hope rekindled. Oh, already beautiful things coming up. I knew I wouldn't sleep unless I asked you what you thought. Collaboration, absolutely. Inspiration, inspired, collaboration. Oh, you're warming my cockles here, folks. Outstanding. Good practice. I'm seeing so many sort of hopeful messages coming up. What a lovely, positive way to be ending the day. You wait till I ask you the next question. Let's see if I can make you sad. No, let's not do that. Okay, I'm going to have to hurry you along, folks. I know we've still got 8 people participating, but you will have another question. But for that, I need to press a button. Hold on. Okay, I'm giving you 6, you 2. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Oh, I'm a megalomaniac. Here we go. So the next question is, tell us in 2 to 3 words, what can Wales do differently on the journey to end homelessness? We've had so many amazing ideas today, folks. But if you've got something special, chuck it up there. Housing first at scale, absolutely. Invest in mental health, joint working, building more homes. Build more homes! It's huge. Invest, absolutely. Early intervention, prevention, all the good stuff that we're really good at in Wales. But we could do more of it, couldn't we? Social justice, using empty properties. Ooh. There's definitely a trend, but it's far more spread across things here. And I suppose that's because there is so many things that we could do on the journey to end homelessness. But you are giving me hope, everybody. Okay, I'm going to give you 10 whole seconds. I'm going to drag this time out as much as I can before I have to leave. 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Thank you very much, everyone. I hope you've had a lovely day.
Thank you to Mark, and I'm just going to say a few words from myself in closing, but before I do, Mark, it's a very important point. There is an event evaluation. There are QR codes on all the tables, So can you please access and complete it before you leave? Feedback is very important to Shelter Cymru to shape future events, and it's been kept brief, so it should only take a few minutes, so we'd really appreciate it if you fill that in. Before I hand over to the Chair of Shelter, Mike Theodoulou, I just wanted to share a few observations from me. Firstly, it was really great to hear what's happening in Europe. It's really positive. And it is important that we look at what Europe are doing and what other countries are doing. But Freek, I really appreciate it, and I think Elizabeth also appreciated how the comments about what Wales are doing and what we're doing in this country. And I think for a small country, we are punching well above our weight. And I think we do, one of the things that we do have a strength in is our partnerships from local government, from housing associations, third sector, charitable organisations, right up to Welsh Government. And we saw that with the accessibility of the Minister this morning, open to Q&A. I don't think that's replicated elsewhere in the UK. I can't speak for other parts of Europe and the world, but I do feel fortunate at times that I'm Welsh and I'm part of that Welsh revolution to try and end homelessness. This is something that is shared across all sectors. We all want to end homelessness. And absolutely the comments from that second one, what can we do? Yes, we can build our way out of it, but I think there are also lessons we can learn in terms of scaling up Housing First as a really great example. I think you'll agree, I hope you'll agree, Shelter Cymru's first hybrid conference was a big success. So well done to all the organisers for that. I need to thank all the speakers, but I will also thank all of you for your support and for your contributions, which is very greatly appreciated. And I'm now going, without further ado, to hand over to Mike Theodoulou. So please give a warm welcome to Mike, and that's enough from me. But thank you for the opportunity to chair the conference today. It's appreciated. Thank you all.
Well, I don't know about you, but I'm exhausted. First thing I want to do is to ask you to show in the normal way your thanks to Andrea for being an excellent chair for the day. Well done. I too want to offer my thanks to the main sponsors, to the Shelter Events team. Where are you? Stand up if you're in the room. Take a bow. Well done. And to all the presenters. Now, I'm not going to keep you long. It's been a long, long day. But just to sum up, this morning, we had a lot of encouragement from the Minister, asking us to continue fighting the good fight. But perhaps the most important thing that came out of her today was her willingness to listen and willingness to consider ideas. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. Ruth this morning took us through the journey to end homelessness, the right to adequate housing, and put up some figures about the impressive work Shelter Cymru has done. I couldn't be prouder of this organisation. Nearly 18,000 people helped by Shelter. That's a lot of work. And I'm sure you all agree that we should be proud of the work that they're doing. We also had a presentation on antisocial behaviour, an important report, and I urge you all to read it and to start using it. Reading it isn't enough. Use it. It is a tool. It's not just a report to collect dust on somebody's shelf. Please read it and begin to use it. The afternoon session was inspiring. Freek took us through a journey of Europe, and I was quite jealous listening to some of the things he had to say, contributions from other partners in Europe. Now, the UK government, it acts as if the UK is an island and they're keen to pull up the drawbridge. Wales must act differently. Wales must not behave in that way. You've seen a taster of the importance of connecting with other countries in Europe. from understanding what they're doing, from learning from what they're doing. And this really links me back to the Minister's call for new ideas. Things will not get better very soon. The chief economist of the Welsh Government predicts that the UK government will continue to borrow at over £100 billion a year, adding to the already huge debt the country has, well into the rest of this decade, well after the subsidy of energy costs has ended. That has to be serviced. That means the squeeze on the public purse will not go away. High interest rates will put pressure on housing. The work that Shelter does will increase, not decrease. We need new ideas. We need invention. We need initiatives. Things like Frank mentioned, socializing the private rented sector. It's been done before in this country, back in the 1980s, with the invention of large-scale leasebacks, short-term leasebacks, turning properties above shops into accommodation. A lot of that happened in London in the 80s. I was involved in it. I lived through it. We need to get our ideas back again. We need maybe a special conference, and I'll discuss this with Ruth in the next few days. Maybe we should call for initiatives to combat homelessness in this country. Ideas from practitioners in this room. Ideas that we can actually share with the Minister. Quite often you attend conferences like this, you get energized, you listen to good things, you listen to good stories, you feel great, I must remember that. A week later, you're back doing what you were doing again, forgotten. We can't afford that to continue to happen. You heard a lot today. Every single one of us in this room has a duty to do something with it. Doesn't matter how little it is, but take it away today and do something with it. Shelter, in its turn, will look at what we can do to bring it all together. We will take that role very seriously, and we'll be discussing it with ministers to see how we can actually produce a forum, a platform for initiatives and ideas to combat homelessness. Ruth described the journey to end homelessness. I'm going to end by asking you to believe the journey. Thank you all very much. Enjoy your journey home, and I hope you've enjoyed today. Thank you.